How does one bold move at an anniversary dinner become the start of a lawful ending? Why did my husband wait, gather proof, and then answer me in the open when I thought I controlled the story? What begins as a harmless test turns into orders that start today. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Rima Calder, 33, and I still don't see why everyone called that moment cheating. It was our anniversary dinner, not a courtroom. We were sitting in the restaurant's back booth, candles flickering, soft music playing. Jonah had been quiet all evening, talking about practical things, budgets, chores, what color to repaint the kitchen. Then Felix showed up. He wasn't supposed to. He just walked over, smiling that easy smile, and said he wanted to congratulate me on the event I'd organized that week. I laughed, and maybe I laughed too hard. Jonah barely looked up. Felix stayed for a drink. He told a story about how confident I'd looked at work, and I remember thinking Jonah should be proud to hear it. When Felix's hand brushed my waist under the table, I didn't stop him. It wasn't passion, it was proof, to myself, that I still mattered. Jonah's eyes went cold, but he didn't make a scene. He just said we'd talk later. Everyone always says silence is maturity, but his silence felt like punishment. That night, I told him he was overreacting, that he should be grateful anyone admired me. He said respect and attention weren't the same. I told him he just didn't know how to handle a strong woman. He said I didn't know how to handle truth. I've replayed that dinner in my head so many times. The soft music, the flash of Felix's phone camera, Jonah's jaw tightening when he saw. I was celebrating myself, not betraying anyone, or at least, that's what I believed. Even now, I tell myself it was harmless, that one small touch couldn't ruin a marriage. I didn't realize it wasn't the touch that changed everything. It was how calm he stayed after. The morning after that dinner, the house felt too quiet. I woke up expecting Jonah to have cooled off, maybe even laugh about how dramatic it all looked, but he was already gone. His side of the bed was cold, and the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee. 2 mugs sat on the counter, his clean, mine half-finished. He'd washed his and left it upside down like always. I stared at it, angry that he could be so calm. I told myself I'd text him, but what would I say? Sorry you don't understand modern marriage. Instead, I called Marina. She'd seen the dinner post because, of course, Felix had shared a photo of our table, tagged me and written, "Best night, best company." I laughed it off when she teased me. She said it looked like a spark. I said, "A harmless one." She said, "Then stop defending it like it's a crime." That made me feel lighter for about an hour. When Jonah came home that afternoon, he didn't look at me. He went straight to his laptop, sat at the kitchen table, and started typing. I told him we should talk. He said there was nothing to say. I said he couldn't just ignore me. He said, "Ignoring would mean I care less than I do." His voice was flat. I said he was twisting words to sound smart. He said, "You do that better than anyone." I followed him to the study, standing in the doorway. The room looked different, tidier, almost staged. On the desk sat his notebook, closed, and beside it a small folder labeled household. I asked what that was. He said, "Bills." I said, "You don't even pay the bills. I do." He said, "Exactly." I walked closer, but he slid the folder into a drawer before I could peek. The lock clicked softly. I asked since when he locked drawers. He said, since privacy started meaning something again. That made me laugh because Jonah never locked anything. He used to say trust was the only safe we needed. I said he was being ridiculous. He said, "You've been calling everything ridiculous lately." I sat on the edge of the desk, trying to change the mood. I told him people online were supportive, that they saw confidence, not betrayal. He said, "They don't live here." I said, "Maybe that's a good thing." He looked up finally, eyes steady, and said, Maybe for you. The silence that followed made me nervous. I told him he was overreacting, that Felix and I were just friends. He said, "You let your friend touch you in public." I said, "It was a joke." He said, "Then we're both laughing." He got up, rinsed his cup and left the room. I stood there, watching the little red light blink on the printer across the desk. It started whirring for no reason, spitting out a blank page. The smell of toner filled the air. I tore the paper out, annoyed, and saw the corner of another folder sticking from the shelf. Bank. Everything was labeled suddenly, color-coded, neat. Jonah had never been like that. When he came back, he noticed me looking. He said, "Trying to learn organization?" I said, "Trying to understand you." He said, "Don't." That night we barely spoke. I ordered takeout and he didn't even come to the table. He ate later, quietly. I told myself I didn't care, that he was being manipulative, but the calmness, his steady way of not reacting, was worse than shouting. It made me want to do something that would finally make him feel something. I went to the balcony and called Felix. I told him Jonah was sulking like a child. Felix said Jonah must be insecure. I said, "Exactly." Felix said he'd never make me feel small like that. I smiled, even though I knew he would, eventually. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee tomorrow. I said maybe, depending on Jonah's mood. He laughed and said, "You don't owe anyone permission." After I hung up, I saw the curtains shift behind me. Jonah was in the hallway, not saying anything, just standing there. I said, "Eavesdropping?" He said, "Just passing by." I said, "Right." He said, "You sound happy." I said, "I am, for once." He nodded once and went into the guest room. I lay in bed that night scrolling through comments on Felix's post. One said, "Her husband's face though. Rough night ahead." Another said, "He looked done." I deleted that one before Felix could see it. My heart was pounding for no reason. Around midnight, I heard something faint, a low hum from Jonah's study, steady and soft. It wasn't the printer this time. It sounded like a shredder. I got up, padded to the door, and pressed my ear against it. Paper feeding, stopping, starting. Then quiet. I whispered through the crack, "What are you doing?" No reply. When I went back to bed, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text preview flashed for a second. "Meeting, personal. Tomorrow 9:25. I frowned. Jonah didn't usually schedule meetings outside school hours. I reached for the phone, but it went dark. The next morning, he was already dressed when I woke up. I asked where he was going so early. He said, "Downtown." I said, "What for?" He said, "Errands." I asked if it was the personal meeting. He said, "Something like that." I told him he was acting suspicious. He said, "You'd know." I called him cruel. He said, "You call honesty cruelty when it doesn't flatter you." Then he grabbed his keys and left. I spent the rest of the day replaying that conversation, angry and restless. I told myself I had every right to meet Felix for coffee if Jonah could have secret meetings too. I wanted to prove that I wasn't scared of his little games. When I walked into the cafe, Felix was already there, leaning back, smiling like the world owed him nothing. He said, "Rough morning?" I said, "You could say that." He asked if Jonah was still sulking. I said, "He's plotting." Felix laughed and said, "He's harmless." I didn't answer, but something about that word, harmless, bothered me. After coffee, I checked my phone. A new calendar alert had appeared. Downtown 9:25, completed. My stomach twisted, though I didn't know why. When I got home that evening, Jonah was back. He was sitting at the kitchen table again, typing calmly. I asked if he'd had a good day. He said, "Productive." I said, "Doing what?" He said, "Cleaning up." I asked if he meant the house. He said, "Not exactly." I laughed, pretending I wasn't nervous. When I looked closer, his laptop screen showed a spreadsheet, rows of initials, dates, and times. Before I could read more, he closed it. I said, "You're keeping score now?" He said, "No, just keeping track." I told him that was creepy. He said, "So was last night's dinner." He stood, rinsed his cup again, and said, "I'm teaching tomorrow. I need rest." I said, "You always need rest." He said, "Lately, yes." He went to the guest room, closed the door quietly, and locked it. The sound of that lock turned something in my stomach. I poured myself wine, opened my phone, and scrolled through Felix's latest message. "You looked amazing today." I smiled, typed back, "Thanks. Some people still appreciate me." Just as I hit send, I heard the faint buzz from down the hall again, a private call lighting up Jonah's phone through the crack in the guest room door. Then silence. When I got to the office the next morning, everyone already seemed to know. That's how fast things travel when people smell drama. Someone had posted a short clip from the restaurant. Felix leaning in, my hand resting lightly on his, Jonah's blank face across the table. The caption said, "Bold wife energy." It had thousands of views already. I told myself it was just noise, that no one would care tomorrow. But when I walked into the open plan office, I could feel eyes on me. A few co-workers smiled like they were proud. Others looked down quickly. Nate from communications grinned and said, "You broke the internet." I laughed, trying to sound casual. He said the donors would love it. I said, "They should. I'm bringing attention to the foundation." He said, "Sure, but not the kind HR likes." Before lunch, my manager, Priya, appeared at my desk. She said she needed a word. I followed her into a small room where the printer sat humming. She closed the door gently. The air smelled of paper and coffee. On the table was a single sheet, blank, just printed. She didn't pick it up. She said, "You know what this is about." I said, "A silly clip." She said, "It's trending under your name." I said, "That's good for outreach." She said, "Our donors are married couples, Rima." I felt myself flush, angry at her tone. I said, "So because I'm a woman with confidence, it's bad press?" She said, "Because you're a representative of this organization, it's complicated." I said, "My husband's the one who made it awkward by sulking through dinner." She blinked, then said quietly, "Your husband didn't post it." I didn't have a response. I just stared at that blank paper on the table like it might explain something. She said, "Keep your private life private, please." I said, "My life inspires people." She said, "Then inspire them differently." When I got back to my desk, my phone buzzed. A calendar alert flashed. Meeting, personal. I didn't remember setting that, and the time was early. Downtown 1340. I thought of Jonah's earlier note, the same pattern. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was coincidence. I tried to distract myself with work, but every time I opened my email, another notification came in. Tags, mentions, DMs. Felix had commented under the video. Some moments are worth breaking rules for. My heart jumped when I saw it. I smiled even though it made things worse. Nate leaned over my desk and said, "You two are basically celebrities now." I said, "You make it sound bad." He said, "Only if your husband sees it." I said he already did. After work, I met Felix at a cafe near the office. He looked more confident than ever, sunglasses inside, leaning back like he owned the place. He said, "You're trending." I said, "I didn't ask for this." He said, "You posted it first." I told him it was just a reaction, that Jonah's coldness forced my hand. Felix said, "You want to punish him or replace him?" I didn't answer. He smirked and said, "Sometimes silence is an answer." We left through the side door to avoid co-workers. On the way out, I saw a man who looked like Jonah standing across the street. Same jacket, same stillness. When I blinked, he was gone. That night, Jonah came home late again. I was in the kitchen reheating soup. He walked straight past me and into the study. I called after him, "You're seriously not talking to me?" He said, "I'm talking. You're not listening." I said, "You're hiding." He said, "No, documenting." That word stuck with me. documenting, like I was a case file. I followed him down the hall, barefoot, soup still in my hand. He was typing again, the glow of the laptop lighting his face. I asked, "What are you writing?" He said, "Notes." I said, "About what?" He said, "About patterns." I laughed and said, "You sound paranoid." He said, "You sound rehearsed." He stood up, moved to the printer, and hit a key. The machine hummed, spitting another blank page. He took it, folded it, and placed it into a folder labeled Bank. I said, "You think printing empty pages makes you look smart?" He said, "It makes me remember to fill them later." I told him he was losing it. He said, "I'm just getting started." I went to bed angry again, scrolling through Felix's messages. He'd sent a link to a gossip page that had picked up our dinner clip. The headline read, "Local arts coordinator shares bold anniversary moment, marriage goals or disaster." The comments were brutal. Half said I was brave. The other half said Jonah should run. I didn't know which side I wanted to be right. The next morning, Jonah was up early again. I watched from the doorway as he made coffee. He didn't pour me a cup. I asked if he was planning to talk to me. He said, "I'm making lists." I said, "Lists for what?" He said, "For when this stops being pretend." He left before I could respond. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast. His mug was clean again, upside down, like a quiet punctuation mark. At work, the whispers grew louder. Priya passed me in the hallway and didn't make eye contact. Nate said the donors were nervous. I told him it would blow over. He said, "Maybe for you." I said, "Meaning?" He said, "Some of us work here full-time." By noon, I got another calendar ping. Meeting, personal, 13:40 again. I opened it, but it didn't show who added it. It just existed. Unremovable. My palms went clammy. I thought of Jonah's calm voice, the folders, the notes, the word documenting. After work, I checked Jonah's study while he was out. The room smelled of paper and toner. On his desk, a small USB stick sat beside a sticky note that said, "Bring forms." I picked it up, held it to the light. My reflection warped on its surface. I almost pocketed it but put it back. The drawer below was locked. The printer blinked again, idle but ready. I pressed a random key, and another blank page slid out. I laughed nervously. I told myself he was just being obsessive, punishing me by pretending to prepare something. I wanted to believe it. When Jonah came home, he saw the door slightly open. He didn't yell, he just looked at me and said, "Curious again?" I said, "You're the one acting shady." He said, "And you're the one looking for proof." I said, "Proof of what?" He said, "Of consequence." I said he was being dramatic. He said, "Then you'll enjoy the show." That night, I sat on the couch and posted a new photo with Felix. Just our hands, a wine glass between them. The caption read, "Learning to feel alive again." I didn't tag Jonah this time. The post got hundreds of likes within an hour. I felt powerful, almost peaceful. Then I noticed Jonah standing in the hallway, holding his phone. He looked at me, said, "You're sure about this version of yourself?" I said, "It's who I've always been." He said, "No, it's who you've decided to perform." He turned, went back to his study. I watched him through the half-open door. The computer screen glowed faintly. A spreadsheet filled the window, columns labeled with dates. He highlighted one and typed something before closing it. I said from the doorway, "What are you doing now?" He said, "Finishing what I started." The printer began humming again, steady, rhythmic. When it stopped, I heard a single click, the lock on the drawer sliding shut. Then his phone buzzed once. He read the message, nodded slightly, and said, "Tomorrow will be interesting." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you'll see what calm can do." Then he turned off the light, leaving me in the dark with the smell of toner and the faint glow of my own phone screen lighting my latest post. By Friday night, I was ready to rewrite the story. Everyone at work had opinions, but no one really knew me. I decided to lean into it, to show that I was fearless, not guilty. Felix invited me to a rooftop mixer for the non-profit's young donors, and I told Jonah we were expected to attend together. He said, "You mean I'm expected to watch?" I said, "You're expected to support." He said, "You'll have plenty of support there already." I rolled my eyes and told him to wear something that didn't look like math class. He came, but he stayed at the edge of the crowd, quiet as always. Felix greeted me first, camera already in hand, smiling wide. "You look incredible," he said. I pretended not to notice Jonah watching. The music thumped softly under the city lights, and people started chanting for a toast. Nate called out, "Speech! Come on, Rima!" I laughed and raised my glass. I said something about trust between partners being the true test of love. Everyone cheered. Felix slipped his arm around my waist, and I didn't move away. Jonah's expression didn't change. I felt that same uncomfortable thrill, the mix of guilt and power. Someone took a photo at that exact moment, a bright flash cutting across the night. Later, while people danced, I went to the bar. Jonah was standing there alone, sipping soda water. I asked if he was going to sulk all night. He said, "No, I'm just counting minutes." I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll see." Felix came up behind me, hand on my shoulder. Jonah's eyes flicked down, then up again. He said nothing. He just set his drink down and walked away. I called after him, but the music swallowed my voice. Felix said, "He'll come around." I said, "He's stubborn." Felix said, "Then make him regret it." I smiled, even though my chest felt tight. When the event ended, people lingered for selfies. Nate recorded us clinking glasses, the skyline behind us. He said, "This is gold." I didn't stop him. I told myself I deserved a little fun. By the time I got home, the video was already online. The caption read, "When confidence scares the quiet ones." I saw the first few comments before Jonah came out of the study. He asked, "Did you enjoy yourself?" I said, "Everyone did." He said, "Not everyone." I told him I wouldn't live my life walking on eggshells. He said, "Then don't be surprised when the floor gives way." He walked past me and closed the door. Through the crack, I saw his computer screen again, an open spreadsheet, now longer than before. He was adding something. I couldn't see what. I heard the faint beep of a recording app starting up. The next morning, I met Felix for brunch. The cafe was crowded, and people kept whispering. He laughed, saying we were local celebrities. I said, "They just envy chemistry." He said, "Maybe they envy your husband's patience." I pretended to laugh. Midway through brunch, my phone buzzed, tagged in a post. Nate had uploaded the rooftop toast. The clip zoomed in on Felix's hand sliding down my side, while I smiled at the camera. Jonah's face, blurred in the background, still visible enough. The caption said, "Trust test passed or failed." I froze. Felix said, "Relax, it's flattering." I said, "It's humiliating." He said, "Only if you admit guilt." When I got home, Jonah wasn't there. His mug was clean, his laptop gone from the desk. A red circle marked a date on the wall calendar, next Thursday. No label. I took a pen and drew a heart over it just to mock him. Then I noticed the folder labeled Utilities, sitting slightly open on the shelf. It was thicker than it should have been. I pulled it out. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, each labeled with a date. Some had notes: dinner, restaurant, meeting, Priya, rooftop, photo. My throat tightened. He was keeping track of me, of everything. I dropped the folder when I heard the door open. Jonah walked in, expression unreadable. I said, "You've been spying." He said, "I've been observing." I said, "That's the same thing." He said, "No, observation stays within the law." That word again, law. It sounded rehearsed, practiced. I told him this was insane. He said, "You've already made it insane." I said, "You're trying to make me look like a monster," he said. "You do that better than I ever could." I followed him down the hall, shouting that he was destroying what was left of us. He stopped at the guest room door and said, "No, Rima, you did that the night you stopped being embarrassed." Then he closed the door quietly, and I heard the click of the lock again. That evening, I called my mother. I told her Jonah was acting strange, cold, detached. She sighed and said, "Maybe he's tired of trying." I said, "You're taking his side." She said, "I'm not taking sides. I'm saying people break when you push too long." I hung up before she could say more. I spent the night scrolling through the comments on the rooftop video. One said, "Imagine celebrating your anniversary like that." Another, "She'll regret that calm look one day." I threw my phone onto the couch. The next morning, Jonah made breakfast for Maya, but not for me. I sat across from them, pretending not to care. Maya asked if Daddy was sad. I said, "He's just busy." Jonah looked at me and said, "Honesty would be healthier." I said, "So would emotion." He said, "Emotion without respect is noise." After he left, Maya drew a picture at the table. 3 stick figures. The one labeled Mom was smiling. The one labeled Dad was small, grey. I told her it was cute. She said, "He looks tired." That afternoon, Felix texted asking to meet again. I said maybe. I was getting tired of him too, the way he only liked me when it benefited him. Still, I couldn't stand the quiet at home. When Jonah came back that evening, he had papers in his hand but hid them quickly in the bank folder. I said, "You're keeping secrets now." He said, "No, I'm keeping order." I said, "You think you're so noble?" He said, "No, just patient." I told him patience wouldn't fix anything. He said, "Patience isn't for fixing, it's for finishing." That line made something inside me twist. I said, "What are you finishing?" He said, "What you started." He placed the folder in the drawer and locked it. I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Later that night, I heard him on a call in the study. His voice was calm, low, measured. I couldn't catch the words, only phrases. Documents ready, timeline clear, next step. My heart thudded. When he came out, I asked who he'd been talking to. He said, "Follow up." I said, "That's not an answer." He said, "It doesn't need to be." I shouted that he was trying to scare me. He said, "No, I'm making sure I don't need to." He went to bed, leaving me standing there in the hallway, staring at the closed door. I checked my phone again. Felix had posted another photo of us from the rooftop, captioned, "Chaos can be beautiful." I almost commented, but something stopped me. I suddenly hated how staged it all looked. My smile too bright, his hand too deliberate. When I put my phone down, I noticed the sound again, the faint hum from Jonah's study. Printer, maybe. Then a soft beep and the click of a drawer shutting. I walked toward the door. Through the crack, I saw him place a small USB drive into a box labeled Archive A. Then he turned off the light, and for the first time, I felt afraid of how quiet he'd become. Sunday came, and with it, my father's birthday dinner at the big family restaurant near the river. It was supposed to be an easy night, a reminder that we were still a normal couple. I told Jonah to be civil, and he said he always was. I spent extra time getting ready, curling my hair, choosing a dress that looked effortless but perfect. When I came out, Jonah just said, "You look prepared." I said, "Prepared for what?" He said, "Whatever this becomes." We arrived late, of course. Everyone was already seated around the long table. My parents, Jonah's Aunt Lydia, a few cousins, Maya with her coloring book. The lights were warm, the kind that make everything look softer than it is. My father joked that we were finally showing up together again. I said, "Busy people can't always synchronize." Jonah said nothing. Dinner started fine. We talked about work, about Maya's school play, about anything except the video. Then Nate, why had I even invited him, brought it up casually. He said the rooftop clip had hit another 50,000 views. My mother's smile froze. Jonah's fork paused halfway. Aunt Lydia said, "So that was real?" I said, "It was just a playful moment." She said, "Looked painful to me." I laughed too loudly. I said, "We're not one of those boring couples who can't take a joke." Lydia said, "Respect isn't boring." My father tried to change the subject, but it was too late. The air thickened like syrup. Jonah dabbed his mouth with a napkin, silent as always. Felix texted me under the table. "You surviving?" I smiled at the screen. My mother saw and sighed. She said quietly, "Sometimes being right isn't worth being alone." I said, "I'm not alone." She said, "Not yet." Maya climbed onto Jonah's lap, showing him her drawing of the family. The father was smaller again, just a stick shape beside two taller ones. My mother asked her, "Why is Daddy tiny?" Maya said, "He doesn't talk much anymore." The table went still. Jonah kissed her forehead and said, "That's okay. Some things don't need noise." The waiter brought the cake then, candles flickering. My father insisted we all make a wish together. I closed my eyes and wished Jonah would just explode already, say something, anything. When I opened them, he was just watching the smoke curl upward. After dinner, people lingered near the door. Lydia pulled Jonah aside, speaking in a low voice. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her hand squeeze his arm. He nodded once. When he came back, I asked what she said. He said, "She told me not to let you drag me down." I said, "And you agreed?" He said, "I didn't argue." The drive home was silent. The city lights passed like dull blinks. I tried to fill the space. I said, "You embarrassed me tonight." He said, "You embarrassed yourself months ago." I said, "You love acting like the victim." He said, "Someone has to act, the rest is performance." When we got home, Maya ran to her room. I followed her in to tuck her bedspread. She said, "Mummy, why did everyone look sad?" I said, "They're tired." She said, "Of you?" I forced a smile. "Of grown-up stuff." She nodded, unconvinced. Jonah was already in his study when I came out. I heard him closing drawers again, the faint click of locks. I leaned against the door frame and asked, "Still cataloguing our marriage?" He said, "Still maintaining records." I said, "Of what?" "My crimes." He said, "Of consequences." The printer light blinked softly. I walked in and grabbed the nearest folder. It was labeled Utilities. I opened it to find what looked like receipts, timestamps, even screenshots of posts. "You're obsessed," I said. He said, "You're documented." I slammed the folder down. "This is pathetic." He said, "This is preparation." I stormed out to the balcony, phone in hand. I texted Felix. "He's losing it. Collects papers like a detective." He replied, "You need space. Come out tonight." I typed back, "Can't. Family's still here." He sent a laughing emoji. I wanted to throw my phone into the street. When I turned around, Jonah was at the door. "Texting him again?" he asked. I said, "You don't own my phone." He said, "No, just the memory of who you were before it." I said, "You make everything sound poetic when it's just petty." He said, "Petty is what you call boundaries when they apply to you." I walked past him, shoulder brushing his, and said, "You'll regret talking to me like that." He said, "Not as much as I regret dinner." Later, after Maya fell asleep, I sat on the couch, replaying the restaurant scene in my head, the looks, the silence, my mother's sigh. I opened my phone to distract myself and saw a new calendar alert. Paper drop, 16:05 tomorrow. My skin prickled. It had to be Jonah's doing. I hadn't added anything like that. I deleted it, but a few minutes later, it reappeared. The next morning, my mother called. She said she couldn't sleep after last night. I said, "You're worrying too much." She said, "I'm worrying just enough." I said, "You always think Jonah's the saint." She said, "No, I just think he's still trying." I said, "Trying what?" She said, "To keep dignity." I hung up before she could finish. When Jonah came back from dropping Maya off, he looked refreshed, almost peaceful. I asked where he'd been after the school run. He said, "Downtown." I said, "For work?" He said, "For order." I said, "What kind of order?" He said, "The kind you can't delete." I froze for a second. "Is that supposed to mean something?" I asked. He said, "Not yet." That afternoon, my father texted asking how things went after dinner. I told him everything was fine. He sent back a single message. "Then why did Jonah call your mother this morning?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I didn't know he'd called her. When Jonah came into the kitchen later, I confronted him. "You called my mother?" He said, "She called me first." I said, "About what?" He said, "You." I said, "You had no right." He said, "She was asking how you got here. I told her you stopped noticing the difference between applause and respect." I threw my dish towel at the counter, shouting that he was twisting everything, making me the villain. He said, "You did that for me. I'm just recording the credits." He left the room again, shutting the study door. A few seconds later, the faint hum of the printer started up, steady as a heartbeat. I leaned on the counter, shaking. The air smelled like ink and lemon detergent. On the fridge, his neat handwriting marked another red circle around next Thursday's date. No label, no note, just that silent warning. I walked over and drew a line through it, hard enough to tear the paper. Then I turned to the window. Outside, the neighbor, Mr. Kovac, was on his balcony watering plants. He looked up at me, eyes lingering for a second too long, like he'd heard everything. I closed the curtain. That night, I tried to talk to Jonah again. I said, "We could start over if you'd just stop pretending to be some investigator." He said, "Starting over requires honesty." I said, "I've been honest." He said, "No, you've been loud." He took a mug from the counter, his mug, plain white, and placed it on the far side, opposite mine. "You notice this?" he said. I said, "What?" He said, "Space means something." Then he walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen with two mugs facing each other, like strangers at a table. Hours later, when I finally went to bed, I heard that sound again. A soft vibration on the nightstand. Jonah's phone. A message flashed and vanished before I could read it, but I saw the thread title for just a second. Follow-up. And then, from down the hall, the steady noise started again. The hum of the shredder, slow and final, like the sound of something ending. By Wednesday morning, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Jonah moved through it with quiet purpose, like he had a schedule I wasn't allowed to see. He woke before dawn, made his own breakfast, and left without telling me where. I started counting the sounds he made. The kettle, the drawer, the lock. Every noise felt like a countdown. I told myself I was done caring. I had my job, my independence, my image. I met Felix for coffee that morning, needing to remind myself I still mattered. He said, "You look tired." I said, "He's making everything heavy." He said, "You give him too much power." I said, "He's planning something." Felix smiled, half amused, half bored. "He's too soft for real revenge," he said. I laughed but didn't feel better. When I came home that afternoon, the air smelled faintly like toner again. The study door was open, so I peeked in. The desk was spotless, too spotless. On the shelf sat two identical folders, Archive A and Archive B. A small USB stick lay between them, labeled with the date. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, small but heavy. There was also a sticky note near the keyboard. "Bring forms." Jonah walked in behind me. "Looking for something?" he asked. I dropped the USB too fast. "Just cleaning," I said. He picked it up, wiped it on his sleeve, and placed it back exactly where it had been. "You never clean in here," he said. I said, "You never locked doors before." He said, "People change." I told him he was being secretive and dramatic. He said, "You call it drama because you don't recognize boundaries." I said, "You're recording everything like I'm your project." He said, No, you're my proof. That word, proof, sat between us like smoke. I tried to laugh. Proof of what? That I still have admirers? He said, proof that I still have limits. He walked out, leaving me in the smell of ink and dust. That evening, my phone buzzed. Rosa, my mother. She said she'd dreamed of me walking through a glass door I couldn't open. I said she was being dramatic. She said, he's calm now. That's what scares me. I told her she didn't know Jonah like I did. She said, maybe you don't either. After we hung up, I noticed the fridge calendar again. Next Thursday's date, the same red circle was still there. He'd drawn it back after I'd crossed it out. No label, no hint, just that bright red mark like an eye staring at me. The next morning, I went to the supermarket to clear my head. Near the checkout, I saw two women from the neighborhood whispering over their phones. One of them glanced at me and quickly turned away. On her screen, I caught a glimpse of a gossip page, the rooftop photo again, my name bold in the caption. I smiled at her anyway, pretending not to care. My hands shook as I swiped my card. When I got home, Jonah was in the kitchen, sorting receipts into piles. He didn't look up. You're organizing now, I said. He said, always have been. I looked at the labels on the envelopes. Home, auto, bank. Every line of his handwriting looked measured, controlled. What is all this? I asked. He said, just catching up. He placed one receipt into a folder, then another, then stopped and looked at me. Do you know why I keep things neat? He asked. I said, because you're obsessive. He said, because chaos hides the truth. I said, you think you're so profound. He said, no, just done. He turned to leave, and I called after him. You can't just act like none of this matters. He said, it matters enough that I'm doing it properly. I didn't understand what that meant then, but the word properly echoed in my head all night. At the school pickup line that afternoon, he stood a few cars ahead of me. I saw him talking to another parent, clipboard in hand. When I passed by, he turned it slightly. I caught only one word at the top, statement. When we got home, I asked him about it. He said, routine paperwork. I said, for what? He said, personal records. I said, you're losing your mind. He said, no, I'm keeping it. That night, Maya asked if we were fighting. I said, we're just figuring things out. She said, are you leaving like Grandma did with Grandpa? I froze. Who told you that? I asked. She said, you talk louder than you think. I tucked her in quietly after that. Later, Jonah sat on the balcony, staring into the dark. I joined him, trying to sound casual. You really think this silence helps? I said. He said, it's helping me. I said, helping you do what? He said, prepare. The air was cool, the city below soft and dim. I asked, so what happens after all your preparation? He said, peace. I said, for you? He said, for everyone. I told him he sounded like he was rehearsing for a movie. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, went inside, and came back with his phone. He placed it face down on the table between us. You'll hear soon enough, he said. The next day, the apartment felt wrong. His desk was empty except for the USB stick, a fresh folder, and another sticky note. Pick up forms, 10:15. I picked it up, heart racing. The hum of the shredder started again in the other room, low and steady. He came out a minute later, calm, composed. You're destroying things now, I asked. He said, only copies. I said, copies of what? He said, of what's done. I followed him as he packed Maya's lunch. You're not taking her away, I said suddenly. He looked at me like I'd said something strange. Taking her? No, he said, arranging time. Time for what? I asked. For balance, he said. That word scared me more than anger would have. Balance, like he'd already weighed everything and found me on the lighter side. That evening, Marina texted asking if I wanted to come out. I said no, I couldn't. My stomach hurt. I opened Jonah's laptop while he was showering, but it asked for a password now. I typed our wedding date. Wrong. Maya's birthday. Wrong again. Finally, I noticed the hint. Archive B. I slammed the lid shut. He came out a moment later, towel around his neck. Looking for something? He asked. I said, just seeing if you're planning to vanish. He said, you'd notice if I did. I said, maybe not. He smiled faintly. That's what I thought. When he went to bed, I stayed awake in the living room. The sound of the shredder came one last time, slower now, deliberate. Then silence. A few seconds later, my phone lit up. Jonah had sent me a text from the other room. We'll handle this properly. I stared at the words for a long time. Properly. Not emotionally, not dramatically. Properly. The next morning, he was gone again, leaving behind 2 mugs on the counter, side by side but not touching. On the wall calendar, that same red circle was darker now, traced over. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thin. I heard the faint beep of the printer turning itself on, unprompted. A single blank page slid out, curling on the tray. And on Jonah's desk, the computer screen lit for just a second, a pop-up in the corner. File uploaded successfully. Then it went black. Thursday arrived like a storm I'd been pretending not to see. I went to meet Felix at a cafe near the courthouse, planning to take new photos, something carefree to post. I wanted to prove that Jonah's silence hadn't broken me. The morning was bright, cruelly normal. When I stepped outside, a man in a grey blazer approached me. He asked, "Are you Rima Calder?" I said yes, confused. He handed me an envelope and said, "You've been served." For a second, I just stared. The courthouse steps gleamed behind him. Felix's car was parked nearby, but he stayed inside. I opened the envelope, hands trembling. At the top, bold letters, petition for divorce, with temporary financial and custody orders, effective today. Jonah appeared then, calm as ever, holding a small folder. He said, "It's official now." I said, "You didn't have to do it here." He said, "It's the only place you'd believe it." Around us, people paused, watching. The elevator bell inside chimed. Jonah nodded once, turned, and walked through the doors without looking back. I stood on the courthouse steps, clutching the papers, feeling the wind lift the pages as if even they wanted to leave me. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.